Imagine a government sending police officers, not to catch criminals, but to check if you prayed last night. Imagine your child coming home from school and, without knowing it, saying the wrong word. The word God, and that being enough to destroy your family. This wasn't a dystopian novel. This was Albania, and it actually happened. In 1967, a man named Enver Hoxha did something no ruler in modern history had ever attempted. He didn't just restrict religion. He didn't tax it, limit it, or push it underground quietly. He declared war on God himself and made Albania the first officially atheist state in the world. All 2,169 churches and mosques were closed, demolished, or turned into gyms and warehouses. The name of God was removed from the official language. And anyone caught with a Bible faced 5 years in prison. But here's what makes this story different from every other tale of Christian persecution under communism. This is not a story of defeat. It's a story of something that refused to die. Families baptized their children in secret. Priests held mass in cemeteries at night. And in 1985, a Christian organization literally sailed a ship to the Albanian coast and threw copies of the Gospel of Mark into the sea in plastic bags, praying the wind would carry them to shore. That's how desperate and how determined they were. This is the story of the gospel surviving in the one country that tried to ban God. We're going to walk through what Albania looked like before the ban, how the regime tried to erase faith from an entire nation, how ordinary people kept belief alive in the most extraordinary ways, and what happened the moment the doors finally opened. By the end of this video, you will understand something powerful. You cannot legislate the human soul. Stay with me, because what happened in this small Balkan country is one of the most remarkable and least told stories in Christian history. 5 chapters. One impossible survival. Let's begin. Long before anyone had ever heard the name Enver Hoxha, long before tanks rolled through Albanian streets and churches were turned into basketball courts, the gospel had already found its way to this small, rugged country on the Adriatic coast. And the way it arrived tells you everything about why it was so hard to destroy. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Romans, wrote that he had preached the gospel from Jerusalem all the way around to Illyricum. And Illyricum was the ancient name for the region we now call the Balkans. Albania, that land. Which means Christian history in Albania doesn't start in the Middle Ages. It starts in the 1st century. It starts with the apostles themselves. For hundreds of years after that, Albania existed at a crossroads, literally and spiritually. Roman roads cut through its mountains. Byzantine emperors claimed its shores. Catholic missionaries came from the west. Orthodox priests came from the east. And then, in the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire arrived, and with it, Islam spread across much of the population. By the time the modern Albanian state was born in 1912, the country was religiously divided in a way almost unique in Europe. Roughly 60% Muslim, 20% Orthodox Christian, and 20% Catholic. 3 faiths. One people, one language, one identity. And that identity had a name. In the late 19th century, as Albanian intellectuals fought for independence, a poet named Pashko Vasa wrote a line that would define a nation. The religion of Albanians is Albania itself. He wasn't attacking faith. He was making a political argument for unity. But that sentence embedded something deep into Albanian culture. The idea that being Albanian came before being Muslim or being Christian. Faith was real. Faith was practiced. But it was also, in some ways, secondary to national identity. This nuance would matter enormously because it was exactly the crack that a future dictator would try to split wide open. What's remarkable, though, is that despite centuries of division, Albanian Christians and Muslims largely coexisted. There are documented stories of Catholic families hosting Muslim neighbors for Ramadan and Muslim families attending Catholic baptisms. The boundaries were porous. Intermarriage happened. A Muslim family might have a grandmother who still made the sign of the cross quietly when she passed a church. The gospel survives communism Albania. But first, you have to understand, the gospel survived because it had already spent centuries weaving itself into the fabric of everyday Albanian life, not just into church institutions. This is the soil Hoxha inherited when he came to power. A people with deep but flexible faith. A nation where religion was real but identity ran deeper. He thought that made them easier to convert to atheism. He was wrong, because what he didn't understand, what he could never understand, is that faith rooted in family, in whisper, in memory, is far harder to uproot than faith rooted only in buildings and institutions. The churches could be closed, the mosques could be locked, but you cannot close a grandmother's memory. You cannot lock away what a mother whispers to her child at night. If this story is already gripping you, and we haven't even gotten to the ban yet, hit subscribe. This trail is just beginning. Chapter 2 is where everything changes. Picture a man who looked perfectly ordinary. Round glasses, a neat suit, a calm voice, and yet carried inside him the absolute conviction that God was the enemy of progress. Enver Hoxha was born in 1908, educated in France, and deeply shaped by the radical left-wing ideas sweeping Europe in the 1930s. When World War II ended and Albania's communists seized power in 1945, Hoxha emerged as the undisputed leader and wasted no time. Christian persecution in communist Albania began almost immediately. Priests were arrested, foreign missionaries were expelled, church properties were seized. But this was only a preview of what was coming. What made Hoxha different from other communist leaders, even Stalin, was the totality of his vision. Most communist regimes restricted religion. Hoxha wanted to eliminate it, completely, permanently. In 1967, he declared Albania the first officially atheist country in the world. All 2,169 religious buildings were ordered shut. The great cathedral of Shkodra, the heart of Albanian Catholicism, was converted into a sports hall. Crosses were removed from cemeteries. Even the word God was quietly pushed out of official communication. An entire nation was being spiritually emptied by government decree. The human cost must be told with the weight it deserves. Priests and imams who refused to renounce their faith faced imprisonment and forced labor. Father Ernest Simoni was arrested on Christmas Eve of 1963, the cruelest possible timing, and would spend 28 years in captivity. Religious leaders were publicly humiliated, stripped of their dignity, and some lost their lives while in state custody. The regime called it progress. History calls it what it was, a systematic attempt to murder an idea. But here is what history always reveals about tyrants who overreach. The more total the controls, the more creative the resistance. Hoxha had banned God from every public space, every document, every school curriculum. What he could not do, what no government has ever successfully done, was ban God from the human heart. And in the darkest corners of Albania, something was quietly, stubbornly refusing to disappear. There was a family, we'll call them by the father's name, Franz, Catholic, living under Hoxha's regime. Every December, they had a ritual. The parents would buy small gifts weeks in advance, hiding them carefully, spreading the purchases across different days so no pattern could be noticed. And when the day came, they would gather the children quietly, no decorations, no songs, no candles, and celebrate Christmas without ever saying the word Christmas. Because if a child mentioned it at school the next day, the consequences could be devastating. This was not paranoia. This was the gospel surviving communism in Albania. One silent, careful, terrified family at a time. What Franz's family lived was the reality of thousands across Albania. Faith didn't survive in institutions. The institutions were gone. It survived in whispers, in the Lord's Prayer, passed from grandmother to grandchild like a family secret, in the sign of the cross made under a blanket at night, in baptisms performed in complete darkness, with doors locked and curtains drawn. The most intimate act of Christian life, welcoming a soul into the faith, had become a clandestine operation. And yet it kept happening. That is the miracle hiding inside this story. Here is what Hoxha never understood about Christian history. You cannot imprison a memory. You cannot put faith in a labor camp. The more you compress it, the more it concentrates, until it becomes something almost indestructible. By the time the regime finally began to crack in the late 1980s, there were Albanian families who had kept the faith alive for over 2 decades entirely underground. No church, no priest, no Bible. Just a mother's voice in the dark and a child who remembered. But this was only the first step. The trail goes much deeper, and what happens next is almost impossible to believe. Keep watching. In 1985, a ship belonging to Operation Mobilization quietly anchored in international waters, exactly 20 kilometers off the Albanian coast. Close enough to see the shoreline, far enough to stay out of reach of the Albanian Navy. On board, a group of Christians did something that sounds almost absurd when you say it out loud. They filled plastic bags with copies of the Gospel of Mark, translated into Albanian, blew air into each bag so it would float, and threw them into the sea, one by one, timing the release with the tide, praying that the current would carry them to shore. That was their mission. That was all they could do. And they did it anyway, because the gospel-surviving communism in Albania was worth every desperate, beautiful attempt. No one knows exactly how many of those bags made it to shore. No one knows how many were found, how many were read, how many were hidden under floorboards or memorized before being destroyed. But the act itself says everything about the nature of faith under pressure. It doesn't calculate odds. It doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It fills a plastic bag, says a prayer, and throws it into the sea. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the wind cooperates. This was Christian persecution, meeting Christian persistence, and persistence was winning, even when no one could see it. Then came 1990. The regime was cracking. Communism was collapsing across Eastern Europe, and even in the most isolated country in the world, people could feel it. A priest named Simon Jubenti had just been released after decades in prison. A man who had lost years of his life, but not 1 inch of his faith. He made a decision that took extraordinary courage. He walked into a cemetery in Shkodra and celebrated Mass openly in defiance of the law. He waited for the consequences. None came. So he did it again. And then something extraordinary happened. A church bell rang out over the city. A bell that had been hidden and preserved for years by a Muslim family who refused to let it be destroyed. Tens of thousands of people flooded into the streets. That moment, a priest, a hidden bell, a Muslim family, and tens of thousands of Albanians who had been waiting in silence for decades is one of the most powerful images in modern Christian history. It wasn't an army that broke the atheist state. It wasn't a revolution with weapons. It was a bell, rung by hands that had kept it safe through the longest night. And when it rang, an entire people remembered who they were. By 1991, religious freedom was officially restored in Albania. Missionaries began arriving from around the world. Churches that had been gyms were reclaimed. Seminaries reopened. And the Albanians who had kept faith alive in secret, in whispers, in plastic bags thrown into the sea, in Christmas celebrations with no name, finally stepped into the light. Here is the number that stops people cold when they first hear it. After 23 years of state atheism, after closed churches, imprisoned priests, banned Bibles, and a government that spent decades trying to permanently erase God from an entire nation, only 2.5% of Albanians today identify as atheist. 2.5%. The man who built the first atheist country in the world produced, in the end, one of the lowest atheism rates in all of Europe. Hoxha didn't kill faith. He accidentally proved how unkillable it is. The numbers tell a story that no ideology could have predicted. According to the 2011 census, 10% of Albanians identify as Catholic, 6.75% as Orthodox Christian. And Christianity is growing in a former atheist state at a rate that continues to surprise researchers and missionaries alike. New churches are being built. Young Albanians are asking questions their grandparents were forbidden to ask openly. The spiritual hunger that was compressed underground for over 2 decades didn't evaporate. It waited. And when the door opened, it walked through. But perhaps no symbol captures the irony of Hoxha's failure more perfectly than this. The international airport of Tirana, the capital city of the country that once banned God, is named after Mother Teresa, an ethnic Albanian who spent her life serving the poorest of the poor in the name of Jesus Christ. A woman Hoxha's regime considered a dangerous agent of the Vatican. She never got to visit her homeland during the dictatorship. She never got to walk those streets freely. And yet today, every plane that lands in Albania touches down at an airport that carries her name. Christianity growing in a former atheist state, written not just in census data, but in concrete and steel. What do we take from all of this? What does Albania banned God Explained teach us that we can actually carry with us? It teaches us that faith is not a building. It is not an institution. It is not even a book, though books matter deeply. Faith is something transmitted person to person, generation to generation, in the most ordinary and extraordinary moments of human life. a grandmother's prayer, a father's silence on Christmas morning that somehow said everything, a plastic bag floating toward a shore, carrying words that governments had decided the world didn't need anymore. Albania is still healing. The wounds of 23 years of enforced atheism don't close overnight. Trust takes time to rebuild. Communities fractured by fear take generations to mend. But the gospel is there, working the way it always has, quietly, persistently, in the spaces between people. The first atheist country in the world is no longer atheist, and the story of how that happened is not just Albanian history. It is a reminder for anyone paying attention that some things cannot be banned, some things can only be buried, and even then they grow. We've walked through 5 chapters of one of the most remarkable stories in modern Christian history. We saw a land where the gospel arrived with the apostles themselves, and where 2,000 years later, a dictator tried to erase every trace of it. We saw Enver Hoxha build the first atheist country in the world, closing churches, imprisoning priests, removing God from the language itself. We saw families celebrate Christmas with no name, children learning the Lord's Prayer like a family secret, and Christians throwing Bibles into the sea and praying for the wind. And then we saw what happened when the wall came down. A priest, a hidden bell, a Muslim family who refused to let it be destroyed, tens of thousands of people flooding into the streets after decades of silence. That image alone tells you everything you need to know about the human spirit and about what faith actually is when it's stripped of every external support and forced to survive on nothing but itself. Albania banned God. For 23 years, it was official policy. And today, only 2.5% of Albanians call themselves atheist. The airport is named after Mother Teresa. Churches are being rebuilt. A new generation is asking questions that their grandparents risked everything just to whisper. This is what the gospel surviving communism looks like. Not a dramatic military victory, but a slow, quiet, unstoppable return. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about faith, about history, about what human beings are capable of enduring and preserving, then share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it, because stories like this one don't spread themselves. We spread them. And every time we do, we're doing something the Albanian believers of the 1970s could only dream of, telling the truth about God, openly, without fear. Thank you for walking this trail with us. The trail doesn't end here. Share this story. And we'll see you in the next episode, where another country, another ban, another impossible survival waits to be told.